I'm Bruce Harders, and this is Voices in the Village. Today we have 93 young Bob Meyer, a captain, a former captain or a current captain in the U.S., was it Army or Air Force?
Air Force.
U.S. Air Force. And not only that, but he piloted something called gliders we're going to talk about. Bob, thanks for coming by and welcome to Voices in the Village.
Nice to be here.
Bob, you have a very interesting background in terms of your family. I would call your family sort of an all-American family. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. My great-great-grandfather came here from England and settled in Pennsylvania.
What year was that?
Oh, about 1633.
1630, that's like 40-some years before the Declaration of Independence.
That's right. He was a farmer. They have a special term for those people, I don't know. It used to be called, oh, my mind is slipping on me here. When someone is almost like an honorable, but we didn't have that.
Well, he was certainly a gentleman farmer,
yes,
that's
Esquire.
For sure. Esquire.
Esquire.
He had a big spread, right?
Yes, he had a big spread.
And he had a very famous visitor one day. Who was that?
Well, he kept a diary, and I was going through excerpts of his diary some months ago, and I was shocked to find out that he had entertained George Washington and his staff and his home because the farm was not far from Valley Forge.
What a fantastic story. Now, okay, so you had him, and then we go to your grandfather. And what was he about?
Well, my grandfather was a minister, but going on from him, my father was a pilot in the First World War.
So the first military guy in the service
was my father.
Also flying.
Yeah, it was my father.
And what was he flying?
He was flying what they used to call a Jenny.
What did that look like?
Well, that's a baling wire and a motor.
That was really an interesting time for flight, wasn't it?
Yes. It's flying by guess and by gosh.
Yeah. Your father.
My grandfather.
Your grandfather.
Great-grandfather. Right. Came here from Germany on my dad's side.
Uh-huh.
And he arrived here just at the beginning of the war between the states.
So we're looking at
the
the
Civil
War now.
And he applied to the Illinois State Militia, which is an organization I joined in World War II. And my great-grandfather was 6'8" tall. And if you'll think back during the war between the states, the average height of a man was about 5'3". And here's someone 6'8". And the colonel was most disturbed. He said, "We can't get a uniform for him." And the captain said, "That's all right. We just lost our tailor, and we'll set him up on a table and let him sew bullet holes." So that's what he did.
Well, anyway, I think we got it straight now. We've got George Washington visiting one guy, and then we've got the Flying Jenny, and we've got the Civil War, and now getting in the Second World War. There was you and your brother in that,
yes.
Wasn't it?
My brother was about 3 years before me, and he was flying in Africa during the time I was a student.
Now, you started out in high school in ROTC.
Right.
What kind of an experience for a young man at that time was that?
Well, I had been a Boy Scout, and I liked the regime and the regulations and the power flow that goes from that. And so I had a choice for going to athletics or going into the ROTC, Reserve Officers Training, and I took the ROTC.
You know, many years later, when I was in college, a lot of people did exactly the same thing. They didn't want to monkey around with Jim, so they joined the ROTC. Right. Now, you obviously, as you talked to me before, you obviously were a good pilot, not only a glider pilot, but a regular pilot. What skills and what capabilities do you think that allowed you to be a really good pilot?
Well, first off, I had good eyesight. 2015, which is a little better than normal. So I could use those. And because I had become a glider pilot, I learned to recognize a lot of the problems that power pilots didn't recognize. In other words, we flew by the seat of our pants, and therefore we had a feel for the airplane, which was very important. Also developed in us the necessity of always looking for a place to land, because if you lost your toe, you were going down.
Right.
And so whether you walked away from it or not, would depend on your skill of finding an open field and landing without hurting yourself.
Now there was a general by the name of Hap Arnold. They really put together the
He
U.S.
was the head of the Air Force.
He was the guy that put together the glider thing, right?
Right.
And there were a few. Russia and Germany both were into the glider
All the
business. weren't they?
major nations in the world had gliders. Italy had them, China had them, Japan had them. We were latecomers.
Yeah. Now I know you've told stories about how when you could land, sometimes you couldn't see anything. It was totally dark until at the very last minute, et cetera, et cetera. Did that happen quite a bit?
Well, this main time it happened was in Normandy. We took off at 12:30 from England and flew around England over air bases, picking up more gliders, more tow ships. But the trouble was there was a high overcast clouds, and it was so dark I could not see the tow plane.
Now I think we need to talk about the point too that these gliders were towed by a giant airplane,
C-47.
C-47.
The first airliners.
And at some point in time, they had to cut the tow line, let you guys go, and land where you needed to land.
Well, it's a little bit different than that is because they weren't allowed to cut us. And the reason was the tow hitch that connected us to the tow plane weighed about 25 pounds.
Wow.
And you could imagine a 25-pound cannonball coming back in your face. So we did the cutoff. They would signal us with a green light and tell us now's the time, and you'd cut off and do what you had to do. Unfortunately, in Normandy, it was so dark I couldn't see the tow plane. So those 5 hours I spent flying all over England,
Right.
getting a glider train together,
Right.
I couldn't see the plane.
Right.
So I flew by the exhaust,
By the exhaust.
the twin exhaust coming from those airplanes. That's what I flew. And I'm telling you, we went a little bit berserk after a while. In fact, one time I chased the North Star because that's very hard to do.
Yeah. How did it come to be? Obviously, when you went into service, you weren't expecting to fly gliders. You were hoping to fly those
Right.
bigger planes.
That's right.
How in the world did you end up as a glider pilot?
Well, I went through basic training in Kelly Field, which is the academic part, and then I was transferred up to Bowman Field in Bottom, Texas, and there I learned to fly what they call primary. And after that, I graduated and was sent to Texas, to the West Point of the Air, to learn to fly the larger airplane, the BT-13. Unfortunately, I had a bad experience at that time. I went through the training and got through, and I was recovering in my bunk, resting up after all the trials and tribulations. And I had a call from my instructor that said, "We goofed." I said, "How's that, sir?" He said, "We're an hour short." Oh, so, "Sir, I've got a very bad cold, and I don't think I can fly another hour." He said, "Son, you're going to have to." But he said, "I'll do the flying, and you just ride as a passenger, and we'll have some fun." Well, fun to a pilot is when you have a day in Texas, huge cumulus clouds that climb so high. We would pretend we're toboggans, and we'd follow the contour of that plane. And it's a lot of fun. It's like coming down the mountainside. And however, after the second trip down, he said, "Oh my Lord." He said, "I'm supposed to meet my girlfriend." And he peeled off, which means he went like this, and from about 12,000 feet to 1,000 feet, and I died. Well, the change in air pressure is quite substantial, and it blew my eardrums. And I spent 2 weeks in the hospital at Bonham, Texas, overcoming what I thought was a busted eardrum, and found that my class had graduated. I thought I'd just go into the class behind it, and they said, "No, with your ears, we can't use you."
That was a shock.
Well, there's my entire future. I've been working towards this for years. And so when I met the board, which told us what we could do, they said we have several choices. You can be a liaison pilot. You can be a pilot that looks for guns at the front so you can identify where they are. Or, well, we do have a new one. It's called glider pilots. And I said, sir, what is a glider pilot? He said, a glider pilot is an airplane that has no motors. Oh, that's interesting. And I said, well, how does it fly? He said, you're towed behind a large transport. And they tow you to the area where you need to go. They signal you, you cut off, and make a dead stick landing, meaning you have no power to help you behind the enemy lines, and you'll be at least 5 miles behind the enemy line. There may become a time that you'll be 100 miles, which I did in Holland.
Right. So that was, now, if you hadn't become a glider pilot, you had a couple other options.
Yeah, I could become just a passenger flying small planes, carrying messages, or looking for sites for German guns.
Right. Well, now, did your hearing ever come back?
Well, my hearing came back. My ears healed, but the damage was done.
The damage was already done.
Because I was removed from the Air Force,
Right.
Army Air Force at that time, and ended up the best thing I could get was a glider pilot.
Well, Bob, this has really been interesting. You know, World War II, that was a long time of war, and I think we have a lot more to talk to you about. So this is going to be our first part of a two-part series.
Thank you.
So thanks for coming by, Bob, and for you folks out there, this is Bruce Harders with Voices in the Village, and we'll see you with Bob in the near future. Thanks a lot, and goodbye.